Point and Click Productions presents. I hope this is picking up through this microphone. Is it? Hello. Is it picking up through this microphone? Oh man, you guys don't want to see that, but maybe I'll cut that out of the later edition. I don't want to be yelling because my mask. You know what? Let's start again. Point and Click Productions presents. What did I call this? The Problem of Early Genius and the Case of Billie Eilish. Now, as those of you who have watched, listened, observed my presentations previously may or may not have noticed, I'm a huge rockhead. My Bible was written by Rabbi Peter Townsend, Rabbi Roger Daltrey, Rabbis Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, the group of rabbis known as Yes, Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the Beatles, that goes without saying, and the Stones to some extent. So my very being is dominated by music, and particularly rock music, all the way from mid-1960s, stretching as far as 1975. Just kidding. Actually, I like music, as it turns out, all the way up to 2021. A little bit of a bias towards the stuff between 65 and 75. That said, when my daughter played me Billie Eilish, I had to collect my jaw from the floor and put it back in my mouth because I was stunned at how good she is. Now, when I say good, I mean the following. A smoky, sultry voice of a torch singer mixed with the beyond, I mean, hipper than I can possibly even think about being, late, whatever decade that was, 2010 to 2020, late in that decade, hip hop sort of stuff that I can't even describe. You know what I'm talking about if you listen to pop music. No auto-tune, no detectable auto-tune. Really cool effects on the voice at times, but the main thing is the lyrics combined with all of that. The bumping beats, and bumping, I know that's very year 2000 of me. The tastefulness, everything, just holy wow. But the lyrics, as it turns out, of a very suicidal 16-year-old and a brilliant 16-year-old on so many levels. And so I'll share with you, I just went on a trip to Washington, D.C. Those of you who saw my last video, I'm kind of weirdly hunching in because I don't want my neighbor to hear my rantings and ravings, and I want the levels to be decent, which is why I was messing with the headphones earlier. On my way to Washington, I listened to some of these songs and shed a few tears. On my way back from Washington, I listened to the whole album, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? And cried, full on, sat there, tears coming down my face, trying not to sob audibly so that the person 2 seats from me, luckily there was no one directly to my left, I was at the window seat, so that the person 2 seats from me would not get concerned about me. I held back. And this album made me full on cry, on and off for 40 minutes. And then I just went right back to the beginning and listened to it all over again. And then I was so concerned about her because I said, this youngster is going to kill herself shortly after she drops this album, if she hasn't already. I knew she hadn't. But I wanted to know what the deal was because I didn't realize when that album had dropped. As the kids say, you drop an album now. I looked it up, and sure enough, well, surprise, surprise, I am a clinical psychologist. One of my main responsibilities is to prevent suicide, as it turns out, to assess suicidality and then prevent it. When I heard this album, I knew she meant business. She really meant business. So I Googled it, and of course, yes, she had attempted suicide shortly after dropping that album, somewhere around then. Somewhere around when she put out that album, she did in fact attempt suicide. So aside from, I guess, sort of ruefully patting myself on the back for being correct, I read on, much to my joy, that this young person had pulled herself together at that point and was doing better by 17 and then better by 18, was starting to educate people about matters related to depression and suicidality. And I think she's 18 or 19 now. And if anyone's watching, or if anyone ends up watching this, they'll probably point out what I'm missing. Well, so this gets me to my topic. Let's see how far, 5 minutes in, I got to my topic. Now, the matter of genius, the matter of very, very talented people. We overuse the word genius. I'm not going to worry about that. Genius is a proxy for very, very talented nowadays. We don't reserve it just for 1 in 100 million people. It's more like 1 in 10,000. Genius is not really associated with mental health problems. It's more of a saliency effect, which is to say, when genius and mental health problems are present in the same person, it is highly salient. It pops. It gets our attention, and it's usually rather interesting. But I don't think that being extremely talented necessarily is in any way associated with mental health problems. What is associated with mental health problems, however, is when this genius, this extreme talent, emerges early and is recognized rapidly by a huge number of people. That ride is not one that everybody is able to take with grace and poise and without breaking down. And in the case of Billie Eilish, I should point out that it wasn't just fame that brought on her severe depression and suicidality. Apparently, it was also some medical stuff, that she had some chronic pain, or at least at age 13 had something to do with a hip growth plate going off kilter. That's all I know from the press. Whatever it was, it's another example of another, meaning I can think of others, and maybe we'll talk about those in a couple minutes. It's an example of when someone fabulously talented gets tons and tons of recognition, actually famous beyond their wildest dreams, really early in life. And this is not always survivable, as we know from examples like Marilyn Monroe comes to mind. There are more than enough examples in rock and roll of people, the 27 Club, the people who died at age 27. And we don't have to go into all that. Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain and this and that and the other and the other and the other. Not all of these people were what I would call geniuses. Not all these people were beyond comprehension talented, but they were all very talented, and they all died young. And drugs and alcohol inevitably tend to be part of the picture. Now, with one viewer and no dialogue thus far, I will continue to ramble. I have a topic. My ideas are constellating before your very eyes, which adds to the crackle of excitement, or maybe makes this a little boring. I don't know which. One or the other. In any case, I'm really enjoying being live these days. I think I'm going to keep doing this. So what is this all about? Let's have a look at this for a second. I've done hundreds and hundreds of evaluations, including IQ, so-called IQ, or cognitive evaluations. I could go into what IQ is and what it isn't, but that's a whole other topic. Suffice to say, I'm not usually interested in the full scale, what's called the full scale IQ, the composite of all the different abilities that the so-called IQ test or the cognitive tests assess. Of the maybe a dozen kinds of intelligence, the IQ tests that we use assess 4 or 5, and at most 6 of a dozen forms of intelligence. At the very most 6. They're really only good at assessing about 4, arguably 5, depending upon how you cut up the cake. Howard Gardner wrote a book called Multiple Intelligences, back in the 1980s, I believe. And I largely agree, not necessarily with all the specifics of his book, but with the concept that we as psychologists, when we assess intelligence, we're really only assessing a few forms of intelligence. If you're interested, or even if you're not, here they are. They are verbal comprehension, which is usually what people notice the most and call someone smart on the basis of their verbal comprehension. Perceptual reasoning is one word for the second form, which has more to do with visuospatial logic and visual and construction ability, the ability to put pieces together and form a meaningful whole visuospatially. Might be associated with certain kinds of mathematical skills and maybe certain kinds of artistic or design skills. Then there's working memory, which is kind of attention and memory put together. The two are very closely related. Working memory has to do with retaining information long enough to perform an operation upon the information and then spit it back. So an example would be, I might assess it, and I do assess it in the IQ tests that I give by reciting numbers, strings of numbers of increasing length. They have to spit them back to me. But what we're really getting at working memory is when I go to the next phase and they have to spit them back to me backwards. So I say 6, 9, 2, and they're expected to say 2, 9, 6. That's one flavor of working memory. Finally, we have processing speed, which is a misleading title. Processing speed really, as assessed by instruments that I use to assess intelligence or cognitive ability in these 4 out of 12 forms of intelligence, and 12 is a somewhat arbitrary number, but really just a minority of forms of intelligence. Processing speed is more of a complex visual, motor, coordination. I call it clerical ability. It's clerical speed. How fast can you process kind of dumb things? Not how fast can you think of something witty to say. That's not processing speed, the way we're talking about processing speed. That's just verbal comprehension, essentially. So this little tangent on how IQ is measured is in the service of understanding what is genius. Well, genius is not, or extreme talent is not something that always shows up on the IQ test because, again, I'm only looking at 4 or 5 kinds of intelligence. What is true is that there's something called, and this is almost a tangent on a tangent, something called general intelligence. Let's not get deep into that, but it's a real thing in a statistical sense, which is to say it's not quite a real thing. Do with that what you will. We can get into it if we want to. In the case of Billie Eilish, in the case of her work, I hear fabulous musical intelligence. I hear very high social intelligence that's not assessed, neither of which are assessed by my instruments or the instruments that we psychologists use to measure intelligence. I hear superb verbal comprehension that can be assessed, as I said, using an IQ test. And I hear something more. I hear artistic intelligence in the sense of on the more abstract level. I guess we could talk about it in terms of how much can this artist move the individual listening. In this case, this is, I believe, I'm getting nervous when I start stumbling on my words. Identifies as female, cisgendered, I don't know of what sexual orientation, not important here. A female voice who uses all the different things accessible to her to produce a very powerful emotional impact. In the case of that album, mostly one that makes me want to cry. And in the case of some of the songs on the album, and in the case of some of her more recent songs, they kind of make me go, yeah, you go. Yeah. There's a youngster who knows what in the heck's going on, and gives me, chills down my spine at how beautifully and how powerfully she makes her case for whatever it is, and with little aggressive, wonderful stabs at things that she doesn't like. So why would this wonderful giftedness be somewhat dangerous and be associated with some people with the high potential of mental health problems, especially when it expresses early in life? Well, it's not hard to imagine, for me at least, it's not hard to imagine. I wouldn't think it would be that hard for you to imagine either, that perhaps you possess a talent and perhaps you hit a nerve and it's kind of a Gangnam style kind of phenomenon where you really hit a nerve and your fame explodes almost overnight. That might be a little overwhelming. That you go from a private citizen, like for instance, me, not many people watch my videos. The few who do are very polite and kind, and I've really had no problems. But if I had 500 million subscribers as opposed to 1,500 approximately, life would be different. I'd be under constant scrutiny. Anything I said that was in any construable way controversial or offensive might result, and probably would result, in a torrent of commentary. Some of which would not be kind, and some of which might be frankly hostile, and some of which might be hostile in a sort of unhinged, frightening way. Add to that, this person is gender female by identification and by appearance to society. Here's where I could get into a lot of trouble if I commented too inaccurately, but I'm trying to use the most current terms I'm aware of. And let's face it, women have gotten more unwanted sexual attention than men over the centuries. I don't think that's a controversial. I'm not going to discuss whether that's true. It's just factual. So if you have a disagreement with that, please don't bother me with that. And then the onslaught of unwanted attention, both of a sexual nature or a romantic nature or just attention, on a very young person who is exquisitely sensitive, otherwise she wouldn't be able to write this stuff. Here's where we get to the core of the matter. The exquisite sensitivity required for someone to be such a brilliant artist, not necessarily mathematician, that's a little different. So we're talking about artistic genius more, but I didn't want to put too many words in the title of this video. Artistic genius requires an emotional sensitivity. Not hard to see why that would be. There are authors like K. Redfield Jamison who have dived deep into this very issue. And that could be another video, or not, that in which I might discuss the specifics of how that might work. But the genes for mood disorders, that is, the genes for being vulnerable and tending to form a mood disorder, are inextricably tied up in the genes for artistic brilliance. So the person starts out, someone like Billie Eilish probably started out somewhat vulnerable. She comes from a family of performers and probably carried already some genes that predisposed her both for artistic brilliance, let's call it, if we don't want to overuse the word genius, and also predisposed her to be profoundly moved by the world. And then she had some painful physical pain, bodily pain, probably body image affecting experiences with the growth plate issue at age 13. I'm sure there are YouTubers who are really into this stuff. This is not my usual stuff. Although, what is my usual stuff these days? I'm all over the place. But in any case, and then she puts out her first works and gets staggeringly famous overnight and faces everything that a young performer, a young person in the performing arts, and I'm going to say it again, particularly gender female, cisgendered, unknown to me, sexual orientation, sounds pretty hetero dominant, but I have no idea. I'm not going to necessarily go any further with that comment. But certainly gender female presentation, feminine presentation, but a decidedly defiant feminine presentation that says, hey, I'm not going to gussy myself up for you. Actually, I might wear weird things. Actually, I might make a video where I show myself running around a mall, grabbing the most junky foods I can possibly get my hands on and stuffing my face with it. And just really in your face, flouting a lot of the demands upon the sex symbol, the Marilyn Monroe of our times, out and out rejecting that from the get-go has been my impression, but nonetheless is beautiful as everyone is, but also in some conventional ways she's beautiful. And much more important, her voice, without any question or controversy, is exquisitely beautiful. And that's enough. Actually, in Orthodox Judaism, some observe the principle known as kol isha, the voice of a woman. Now, let's not get into the feminist analysis of this. We can have another video about that. I don't think I'm a good spokesperson for feminism, honestly, being gender male. Except other than that, I am very, very supportive of 99% of feminism. Where am I? What am I doing? What am I saying? Where am I? What was I going? Feminine. Oh, kol isha, the principle in Judaism that some Orthodox Jews follow of if you're married, you must not hear a woman sing, period, unless they're your wife. Now, I wouldn't want to live under that, but it's telling. It tells us something about how powerful, how romantically attractive singing can be. And I think that transcends all gender. Look at the Beatles, look at whoever, Justin Timberlake, look at Old Blue Eyes. Why am I forgetting his name? Sinatra, Frank Sinatra. There is a powerful romantic and sexual pull of someone who has a fantastic voice and gives fantastic delivery. I've actually run out of time. I've actually talked myself right up to when I have to see a client. So maybe this is part one of something that I'll continue. I do hope this has been interesting. Again, I can't say enough good things about Billie Eilish. I adore her work. She seems to be a superb, superb person, if we can say such things of people. We are all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. She seems to have done wonderful things with a terrible experience in terms of educating others now about depression, about suicidality, and related topics. And our topic has been the impact of precocious genius, the impact of early genius or early extreme talent, brilliance, what have you. And I want to add, particularly in the performing arts, on mental health. And there is a relationship there. And let's explore it further, perhaps, in our next video. You know me, if you've been watching these videos, you never know when I'm going to finish a project or when I'm just going to move on. And this is no exception. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Beyond that week, all bets are off.